When it comes crashing down and it hurts inside, Hulk Hogan, the icon has passed, but he doesn't like you if you've got dark skin. You must be white as a fucking sheet, unless you're rich and with his daughter, then he won't call you the fucking N-word. Hogan loves racist Americans like the orange fucker you dumb fucks voted in. Hogan loves racist Americans, but now he's gone. Can the other guy be next? Da 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 da. Ha 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 ha. I guess death did work for him, brother. Yeah, it's going to be one of those tributes, folks. You can recognize how incredibly impactful Hulk Hogan was to the history of professional wrestling. Had it not been for Hogan arriving, wrestling would not be where it is today. Many will not want to admit it. I myself would have a hard time admitting it, especially since Randy Savage was always a much better spokesperson for the company and actually put people over properly. Bret Hart put people over properly. Hulk Hogan drew a fuck ton of money. An absolute metric fuck ton of money. In WWF, in WCW, back in WWF, even in the AWA. I'm going to talk about his complicated legacy. If that intro offended you, I do not fucking give a shit. Because he died on the 10-year anniversary of those racial goddamn comments coming out. So you couldn't write a better storybook ending for the goddamn piece of burnt bacon that became Hulk Hogan. But Terry Bollea obviously would, be living on because Hulk Hogan was a fictional person. So, oh my God, there's two of them. Yeah, I'm going to have a little bit of fun with this. I don't really fucking care if anybody has a problem with this. Everybody's getting their jokes off. Everything is funny. So yeah, Hulk Hogan, one of the greatest icons in history of professional wrestling, passed away. Boo! Hulk Hogan, admitted and never apologized racist, is dead. Yay! Hulk Hogan, the guy that appeared supporting Trump, is dead. Yay! And if that bothers you, I do not fucking goddamn care. Hulk Hogan was one of my favorites growing up. I can watch Hulk Hogan matches, the heel turn at Bash at the Beach 96. The mere fact that Hulk Hogan was part of so many impactful moments in the history of wrestling that we will talk about. Many people that weren't even born at that point can still recognize the impact that Hogan had on professional wrestling. And then the lies and the racism, the bigotry, the bullshit, the amount of damage that he did to his own legacy when he didn't fucking have to. It is unfucking believable, by the way, that he outlived Randy Savage. It's a shame that he outlived Randy Savage, who himself was a complicated person but actually did good. And I'm not saying that everything that Hogan did outside of wrestling was bad. The Thunder Mixer was a fucking flop. Hulk Hogan's Pastamania. Who remembers the Pastamania stuff from the Mall of America stuff? Who remembers that? Who remembers that bullshit? So, yes, at the age of 71, Hulk Hogan passed away. Heart issues, that kind of stuff, whatever. I mean, he hadn't looked healthy for a while. The last time he appeared on WWE programming, he got booed out of the building, which is fitting. And it is not because, by the way, you can make a lot of comments. You can say a lot of things. You can make your own kind of music. You can dance your own kind of song, even if your legacy, but you will not live on. I think Mama Cass actually passed away a while ago. But poor Jimmy Hart was out there with Hogan. And Jimmy Hart, by the way, who is like a decade older than Hogan, moves better. Now, yes, Hogan did a lot of damage to himself and all that, but Jimmy Hart is still revered as one of, if not, one of the top 4 managers of all time, that is. Hulk Hogan, 10 years to the day where he was released from WWE from his ambassador contract or whatever the fuck it was, he was part of Tough Enough because of all the racist comments that he made. Had he apologized, made amends, and done his best, I'm not saying everybody would have forgiven him. Everybody can mourn, cheer, throw babies in the goddamn air over Hogan's death. I don't really care what you do. People are going to say, oh, Hogan can reunite with Randy Savage in heaven. He's not going to heaven. He's going to be down there in hell, as Randy Orton once said about Eddie Guerrero in that terrible storyline. He didn't want to say that. But Hogan, all he had to do was apologize. Apologize to Booker T, apologize to New Day. But no, he basically said, careful what you say on camera, brothers. So, yeah, before I get into a lot of his career, I'm going to mention that I really wouldn't have minded an apology tour, but I'm not the person he should be apologizing to. Because that word didn't hurt me. Those words did not hurt me. They hurt many people who looked up to Hogan. By the way, many of his contemporaries who passed away, many people he worked with, many African Americans, many people of different colors, were obviously deeply offended. And Booker T, even at one point, like when Hogan was, I think it might have been the same show where he confronted Brock. I don't exactly remember, but I remember Booker T had a look, just looked at Hogan, was looking daggers at him. And Booker T, that famous promo, that pre-tape that he did, where he thought he was going to be fired, we're coming for you, Hogan. I'm not going to say the word, but you know the word. Please don't say the word in the comments, by the way. But yes, for all that Hogan did in his career, all the PR, and he was the perfect guy for Vince to bring in. And he was the only guy that they could bring in for, the lead up to WrestleMania and beyond. Because they could have brought Kerry Von Erich in, it would have flamed out. That was when he had both feet on the ground. Had they made a better deal with Sergeant Slaughter, he would have still been over, but it would have not been Slaughtermania. Slaughter was also a bit older than Hogan at that point. And Hogan was the perfect guy, coming off the AWA, coming off all that I'll talk about. And Hogan's entire legacy in the ring, on promos, is set. But the man himself did so much damage to how people perceive him, that no, I do not mourn the death of the person. Because you can relive those memories. You can have a whole bunch of fun. You can enjoy yourself, lose yourself in the music, the moment. Bitch, you may never want to let it go. But you will understand that many people have every right to be upset at Hogan. Many people, by the way, who are a way different skin tone than me, have way more right to be upset at Hogan than I do. It hurt me as a wrestling fan because I'm thinking, okay, obviously you would not expect some guy that grew up where he grew up and at the age he was to be the most progressive thinker. But for somebody basically to counter argument his own, arguments and his own lines and his own lies and bullshit, sometimes in the same interview is actually a miracle. It's almost weirdly impressive how Hogan kept up with the lies, like saying that Harley Race was pissed that they ran in St. Louis and he set the ring on fire, which would have been the most amazing goddamn visual. And people could be like, who would have stopped Harley Race? Why would you try to stop Harley Race, even in '86? But Hogan himself, an admitted racist, an admitted bigot, an admitted piece of shit. But that's okay, because he did the poses and said, say your prayers, take your vitamins, and all the surgeries and all the drugs and all the stuff that he did. Oh yeah, all the Real American Beer Company is probably going to go tits up. That Real American Freestyle Wrestling thing, I remember seeing the video thinking, Hogan probably isn't long for this world, but he's probably got a few more years. But man, it is proof that evil doesn't live forever. And yeah, Hogan was evil. He admitted he was. If you don't apologize for bad behavior and try to make amends and everything, then you basically are just like, oh, fame will make sure that I, am Teflon. No. And plenty of goddamn people. Bischoff said, oh, there's a certain percentage of fans that boo him, but the 90% of the fans love him. No. And now what's Bischoff going to fucking do for money? A grifting scheme this time. So, before I really get into anything, I just want to talk about the complicated legacy and the bullshit of Hogan's lies of numerous things, and the fact that he thought that him and Randy made up before they died. Maybe they did. I don't know. Maybe Randy decided to be the bigger person because Hogan sure wasn't going to admit he was wrong. But I do want to say, as I close this part before I get into his career and I talk about some of his moments and everything, there was one Twitter user, I did not write the name down, where they said, Hogan's going to have himself cremated because he's not going to allow anyone to bury him. And that's just fucking hilarious. So now let's talk about Hogan's legacy. So if people are offended by the first 10 minutes or so of this video, I really don't fucking care. Do your own tributes. Just praise Hogan all you want. He was part of a band called Ruckus. They didn't create much of a ruckus because otherwise Hogan would have continued to do bass playing. He's in South Florida touring, doing like clubs and stuff like that. He worked at a gym. The Briscoes saw him, and, Jack and Jerry Briscoe, Jack Briscoe, fresh off of his NWA World Heavyweight Championship run. Jerry Briscoe. No doubt, Jack and Jerry Briscoe, one of the all-time great tag teams. Like, truly. I mean, even as they were near the end of their full-time career as performers, Starrcade 83 against Steamboat and Youngblood was fucking tremendous. Now, Mike Graham was a little bit older than him and a lot shorter than him. I feel bad for Mike Graham, but I kind of don't. Not exactly a great guy either. But he didn't really want to bring Hogan into the Championship Wrestling from Florida, but okay, you want to be part of this, go train with Hiro Matsuda. Hiro Matsuda broke his ankle or broke part of his leg. And then 10 weeks later, Hogan came back and they trained him. Because they thought he was just a big muscle head. And to be fair, if you look at Hogan, he looked like a fucking putz. But then he worked in Championship Wrestling from Florida. And it's just weird to see the chest hair triangle look that he would have for a bit. And he was Sterling Golden. He was Terry the Boulder Balea. He was at him. He got Ed Leslie, a.k.a. Brutus Beefcake, who is somehow still alive. That's unfortunate, given Brutus's goddamn, behavior over the past number of years. And by the way, I do not wish death on anybody. But you can hope. I could drop dead right after this video and whatever. I'm not going to be missed at all. But when you achieve a celebrity status, you have a chance to leave an impact and a positive impact on people's lives and not be a piece of shit. So he took a brief break from wrestling because I guess it just wasn't working out for him. And he got Beefcake into wrestling. He did the Alabama and the Memphis territories. Continental, I believe, is one of the ones. And then he got into the WWF. And if you hear him on promo, if you see footage of him on promos, he wasn't going to get it yet, but he also was barely in wrestling and everything. He was just barely in the infancy of his career, is what I'm saying. Like, he was working like multiple times a week, but he wasn't Hulk Hogan. And then he had Freddie Blassie as his manager when he got to the WWF. He would have squash matches. He looked great, and you could tell on commentary. Vince Jr., the dirty pervert that he is, the guy that when he passes, it is going to be a glorious goddamn day on Twitter. I think the jokes are going to go on for a fucking week and not get old. But you could tell that he saw something big in Hogan. And how could you not? Looking at him at that point, he had the robe, the cape, that kind of stuff. Freddie Blassie is his manager, and Freddie Blassie could get anybody over as a top heel. He, was part of the, Shea Stadium package in 1980, where he faced Andre the Giant, and that was where he slammed Andre. Obviously, his slam of Andre was not necessarily remembered, by many people because they managed to erase all that stuff. For Mania 3. The people in the area fucking remembered, but the massive TV audience, unless they saw the Shea Stadium show on closed circuit, assuming it was on closed circuit, they didn't know about that. But it was a big goddamn deal. And that's when Andre was a lot lighter and a lot more mobile. To think where he was in 80 and where he would be by 87. But Shea Stadium was a big goddamn deal, but even, Greg Gagne, who is known to tell the truth about 25% of the fucking time, said that Hogan was going to come back in 1991 to the AWA. No, the fuck he wasn't, Greg. What would they have fucking done? Vince wasn't going to let him out of his fucking contract. And even if his contract was going to be null and void, okay, they had not run anything of, substantial size for shows since, fucking Wrestle Rock Rumble? They had Super Clash 2, they had Super Clash 3, they had Super Clash 4, that drew absolutely an abysmal crowd, 2,000, 2,500. That was in April 1990. the same month where Hogan put over the Ultimate Warrior. Yes, fuck the Ultimate Warrior. I'm glad he's dead. And Mr. Queering doesn't make the world work, knocking the stuff on Martin Luther King and all that. And I'm just going to be mean-spirited here. And if you guys want to say, go fuck myself, go ahead. I don't fucking care. But Hogan was going to come back to the AWA after they'd done the Team Challenge series and all that. And they were doing television in an empty studio. And they had been inactive after, like, say, September of 1990. With Vern Gagne at that point, they were going to have Hogan come back. And they were going to somehow manage to have Hogan work with the remaining people that they had in the company. Larry Zbyszko wasn't there anymore, the world champion. He had gone to WCW. They had stripped him of the title. They ran a couple house shows in 91. But by and large, the AWA was a fucking wasteland well before 1990. So that just always fucking bothers me. And maybe Greg believes it, because Greg just wants to defend everything that Vern Gagne fucking did. Anyway, but, Greg Gagne doesn't have to worry, because his dad didn't remember shit. He didn't remember killing a guy a few years before his death. So anyway, Shea Stadium versus Andre. Greg Gagne talks about, what's wrong? Because I guess he was on the show. Good God, that must have been terrible to watch. I mean, if it was Greg Gagne and Jim Brunzell, okay. If it was Greg Gagne in the singles match, fuck. Jesus Christ. Anyway, stint in the AWA. Because after the Shea Stadium show, Hogan got the offer to do Rocky III, be Thunderlips. That was a big deal. He had Eye of the Tiger by Survivor as his theme, which fit. It fit like a fucking glove. JYD had another one, Bites the Dust. And a few other people had music. Freebirds had music. They weren't the first, but whatever. Michael Hayes can believe it, assuming he has any brains left. But Hogan had Eye of the Tiger, which got a massive, massive reaction from people in the AWA. And the AWA still was rocking and doing great business at that point. They had Bockwinkel and Vern Gagne competing for the AWA championship. Bockwinkel was in the midst of a pretty long run at this point. And Hogan came in as a heel and was beating, jobber guys. And then I believe faced Crusher Jerry Blackwell. And then would build up to facing Nick Bockwinkel at the April show at St. Paul Civic Center. That was a disputed finish, where it looked like Hogan got the victory, but no, Hogan did not get the victory. And I talked about this. I've done lengthy stuff about certain of these subjects. AWA Super Sunday, that kind of stuff. Hogan, what if Hogan never left the AWA? And various other things. And, what if Hogan never gone to WWF? But building up all that and everything after the AWA show in April of 82, we build up to Super Sunday in April of 83. St. Paul Civic Center, they closed-circuited as well, so they had a pretty goddamn big gate. I believe Mean Gene was quoted as saying about $400,000 in that money, which would be about 3 times that. Pretty big goddamn deal. I wonder how much the boys got, because we all know that Vern loved to pocket money and not pay people very well, and dock it from the boys when him and Greg wanted to take trips, as Jesse Ventura told. But by not giving Hogan the AWA World Heavyweight Championship on that night, Vern made a mistake. They had a deal with All Japan. Hogan had his deal with New Japan and had been going to New Japan for a while. Did not want to give up his deal. Vern had shafted him on some merch and other stuff and everything, and Hogan basically ended up leaving. That's a glossy and, sanded over version of it. He goes back to the WWF. Vince makes a deal with him. Bob Backlund loses the title to the Iron Sheik. Iron Sheik is champion for just under a month. I think just a few days shy of a month. And then Hogan beats the Iron Sheik, and the place explodes. Now, seeing his entrances, seeing them if you can catch them in the AWA, if you can catch them in the early parts of the WWF television before they got Real American, Eye of the Tiger had the fans exploding. And Hogan was like nothing that the AWA had ever seen, nothing like the WWF had ever seen. Yes, they saw superstar Billy Graham. Hogan could talk them into the building, but Hogan could work more than enough to get people to stick around. Billy Graham is fucking rotten in the ring, but he did enough to get by, and it was also about a decade sooner. God forbid if Billy Graham had been in the same shape that he was in 84 and Vince had gone with him, the company would have gone under. But so Hogan's got his deal in New Japan, and he's still and Vince has his association with Inoki until he has to negotiate to get the Bulldogs back and from All Japan, and he's shaking hands with Giant Baba, and boy, Inoki must have loved that. But Hogan goes on a 4-year, 2-week run as the WWF champion. Now, he is a touring world champion. They're running a lot of shows every single night. They bring him Roddy Piper. He's working with Roddy Piper. Piper doesn't want him to beat him. I mean, he does eventually in like WCW in disputed fashion. I believe was it Super Brawl? I think it was Super Brawl 7. Super Brawl 97. And then he finally beats him in WWF when he was Mr. America. Good God, that fucking fiasco. But Hogan was getting massive reactions. He could have been the most popular guy in the company because he was a champion, but Slaughter was still there in Snuka before, after, renowned murderer Jimmy Snuka, who got away with murdering Nancy Argentino. And his other motherfucker, I'm glad, is dead. He didn't remember what he did, and he had a degenerate brain. He didn't have a fucking brain. Fucking idiot. But he did have a long run. I mean, Snuka had a long run, but also Hogan had a long run as champion. We go into the first WrestleMania. We go to the association with Cyndi Lauper. We go to the Brawl to end it all, War to settle the score, the association with Mr. T. Hogan was an absolute, pretty much the biggest reason why WrestleMania as a media tour succeeded. Everybody else played their part. But the marketing is what pushed, the marketing with Hogan is what pushed it. Piper got them to really pay attention to his heel work. Savage wasn't in the company at this point. Mr. T, fresh off of the A-Team. A lot of this, and obviously Clubber Lang. So there was an association there, and it made sense as to why they went with that tag match at WrestleMania 1. And Hogan was a big part of that. And then he ends up teaming up with Paul Orndorff after Orndorff basically got knocked out by Bob Orton Jr.'s cast at WrestleMania 1. They had their association, and eventually Orndorff turned on Hogan, which led to the biggest, or one of the biggest tours that they had. I mean, they had, I think it was Exhibition Stadium in Toronto in like August, which gave Vince the inspiration for WrestleMania 3. And yeah, WrestleMania 2, he faced off against King Kong Bundy. Bundy, you big fat piece of shit. Good old Ernie Ladd. He did that. It was a big deal that he did that cage match. And he was safe with Heenan, believe it or not. Warrior wasn't safe with Heenan, but Hogan was. And then had to tour with Orndorff. Rest in peace, Paul Orndorff. And that was a great goddamn deal. Anytime you saw the interactions and everything, Orndorff's turn, hitting the clothesline and everything. Even though Orndorff was having the neck issues, and that would lead to the atrophy and eventually his, on-again, off-again relationship with being in the ring until his final match of Super Brawl 2000, which was scary. And then his unfortunate timely demise a number of years ago. But Hogan was rocking and rolling as champion. And basically, after that Exhibition Stadium show, we would go to Saturday Night's Main Event, the first one of 1987. And yeah, I think Orndorff won. But they said it tied, and the tie goes to the winner. And then we obviously built up to Hogan versus Andre, which led to the Slam around the world, and that couldn't work without Hogan. That couldn't work without Andre doing business and the stature that Andre had, literally and figuratively. And the history that he had as a mega attraction, he was so over and he was so revered, but so hated for turning and joining Bobby Heenan. The fans couldn't see or didn't want to see that Andre was not what he was even 5 years before. But Slam around the world, there we are. He continues to roll. They do the big event where, how much did they pay for the plastic surgery, Mean Gene? And let me tell you something, Mean Gene, and all that, all the stuff that he said, all the catchphrases, say your prayers, take your vitamins only 3 times under doctor's orders. Yeah, fuck you, Hulk, you took those way more. Not that he was the only one, but nevertheless, that's Arsenio Hall in 91. And he's rolling as champion. They screw him over with the double Hebners. They had Dave Hebner, then they brought in Earl Hebner. And then they go to the tournament at Mania 4. where Hogan stays out of the main event scene, except he helps Randy Savage because Hogan had to be part of that. And look, I get it. They wanted to have the idea that Hogan was going to anoint him. They were going to build the Mega Powers exploding. The problem is, I guarantee that was Hogan basically saying, hey, I need to be in this mix, Vince, and we're going to do this. Because he could have knocked out Andre, and Randy Savage still could have beaten Ted clean, because Ted was originally supposed to win that. But then, Randy, and they only had 4 pay-per-views a year at that point. In fact, actually, now that I think about it, the first Rumble wasn't even a pay-per-view. That was a TV special. Right against Bunkhouse Stampede. But we basically go with Hogan and Randy Savage teaming up at SummerSlam. And then stuff at Survivor Series, stuff at the Rumble where he accidentally eliminates Randy. Lust in your eyes for Elizabeth. Lust Hogan, as Ventura called him. Mania 5, kicks out of the elbow, just no selling, which I fucking hated. I mean, I fucking hated it anyway, but we got that. We roll on to, him being champion, facing up against Zeus. No holds barred. Good Lord. That was terrible. Rest in peace, Mr. Lister, but come on. God damn it. And he wrestled in Puerto Rico against Abdullah the Butcher in 1990. If you think that sounds bad, it's worse. But he's champion again. And then they build up the Ultimate Challenge. Ultimate Warrior had won the Intercontinental Championship back at SummerSlam 89. They face off at the Royal Rumble, just a brief tease. The instant they throw people out, the people are rumbling. They are shaking the floor. That's a big deal. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it because I was 9 years old at that time. I can relive that and have some good stuff. But there's not a person sitting down. Everyone is standing. And they do their just brief crisscross, brief interaction. They still had interaction on syndicated TV. Builds up to the Ultimate Challenge, title for title. Hogan puts over the Ultimate Warrior in the Skydome. Hogan takes some time off after Earthquake injures him because he was filming some other movies. I forget if it was Suburban Commando or what. But he comes back at SummerSlam, and he is seen as top billing, even though he's not the champion. Because let's be perfectly honest, the Ultimate Warrior, once he won the title, they stripped away any of the cool factor that he had, at least for that brief moment in time. And he's working with Rick Rude, who had a haircut. But Hogan faced off against Earthquake. That would continue for a bit. He would face off against Earthquake in the final 2 of the 91 Rumble. And one thing I did forget about, when Ray Traylor, a.k.a. Big Boss Man, came in 88, Hogan would work with him later in the year and into 89. They would have tremendous matches. Boss Man was taking a superplex off the goddamn cage and was making so much money. He told Jim Cornette that he made like $12,000 in 1 week. And that's incredible. And Hogan, once again, would end up winning the Rumble for the 2nd year in a row. He would then challenge Sergeant Slaughter, who had beaten Ultimate Warrior for the championship at that same event, the Rumble. And then they had to move it out of, obviously, the Trojan Stadium for security concerns, not because the tickets were flopping in sales. And if they had gotten only $40,000 in there, it wouldn't have worked. But they had 17,000 people in the LA Sports Arena, which, to be quite honest, actually is one of the best atmospheres of any of the earlier Manias. He beats Slaughter, is champion once again. So, yeah, he's a multi-time world champion. He faces off against he teams up with Warrior, Triangle of Terror thing. Warrior gets fired. Oh, no. Fucking moron. I mean, Vince used up a lot of talent and everything, but Warrior overstepped his bounds. If he was a good guy, I might not have felt he was overstepping his bounds, but whatever. He got more money than a lot of people did, despite the fact that by 91, yeah, he was getting good reactions. So an outbreak of syphilis. But Hogan lost the title to Undertaker at Survivor Series 91, just to win it back in Tuesday in Texas a few days later, when Vince wanted to try to either do monthly or weekly pay-per-views, which was a bad idea, especially in 91. TNA did it like about 11 years later, and it still wasn't the best. But Hogan was stripped of the championship. 92 Rumble. Sid eliminates Hogan fairly. Hogan pulls him out. This is when fans started to turn on Hogan. They didn't go with Hogan Flair. They went with Hogan Sid, Savage Flair, and that was Hogan's last WrestleMania appearance. He never appeared at WrestleMania again during that run. Oh, he came back and people were yelling at Brutus Beefcake and heckling him in the Manhattan Center, which he fucking deserved, by the way. But Hogan was part of a tag team with Beefcake against Money Inc. And that was a terrible match because it went on for fucking ever. They did a disputed finish, but don't worry, Brett, you're fine. You're going to be the champion. And then Hogan cashed in the Money in the Bank briefcase about 12 years before that concept was ever realized and won the championship from Yokozuna. Maybe he appeared like on 1 or 2 televisions after that. I mean, I can't necessarily remember. Didn't wrestle on television. Wrestled on house shows. Faced off against Yokozuna at King of the Ring 93 instead of putting over Brett at SummerSlam 93 like he should have. And then there you go. There you go. He's out of the WWF. He had competed on some house shows and then left sometime in 93. I believe he competed in New Japan as well. There was the Super World of Sports tours, during the brief association they had. And War, good God, y'all, what is it good for? I think he competed for War. I think he did. I don't know. Did War start then? Whatever. The whole point is Hogan was still competing in Japan. And it competed against Muta. Referred to the WWF title before losing it back to Yokozuna as a trinket. Say it, fuck you, Hulk. And then he gets the WCW. Big splash. Faces Flair, Bash at the Beach 96. Or 94. Beats him. Goes on an insanely long run that further proved that Hogan had some cachet with the fans, but a lot of the Southern wrestling fans didn't really appreciate that. So they were starting to boo him by sometime in 95. He faced Flair a bunch, faced Vader, teamed up with Savage. Savage won the championship, but Hogan disputed it that he never got eliminated from the World War III thing. Hogan turns heel. One of the biggest, actually I would argue the best heel turn of all time. One of the biggest heel turns ever in the history of professional wrestling. Memorable. If it wasn't for Hulk Hogan, you people wouldn't be here. All this stuff. Hogan essentially was the catalyst for the NWO. Even though Nash and Hall were really cool, and they had to basically be the cool heels, while Hogan kind of maybe dialed back the brother stuff, but unfortunately he just couldn't dial that back, brother. But the NWO took off. They ruled. They ruled goddamn wrestling for a number of months. A couple years. At least a year and a half. And Hogan was eternal champion. And it was a big deal. I can't overstate how great the NWO was and how great of a time it was to be a wrestling fan. Everybody was shocked by Hogan turning heel. A lot of people forgot he was a heel in 1980 and early 81, or mid 81 when he went to the AWA. But Hogan as a heel was exactly what WCW needed. And it was a big deal. And he had dropped some weight. And the steroid trial stuff and all that happened in 94. No, Vince never gave him steroids or that kind of stuff or whatever it was, so they couldn't get Vince on that. But Hogan and Vince had a strained relationship. And other people came in. The Nasty Boys came in. Honky Tonk Man came in. Well, actually, I think the Nasty Boys were already there before Hogan. Back in WCW. But Honky Tonk Man came in for a brief stint. Jim Duggan, which, to be fair, Jim Duggan's such a likable guy. You'd have to try really hard to hate Hacksaw Jim Duggan. Was there, and various other people. Mr. T even had a pay-per-view match at Starrcade 94. Where, Ed fucking Leslie, a.k.a. The Butcher, got to beat in the Starrcade main event. The worst Starrcade main event of all time. I mean, I don't fucking care what you guys say. You guys can have your Bill Goldberg and Bret Hart, being a goddamn disaster, which it was. You can have a whole bunch of other stuff. No, that was the worst thing because you have Ed fucking Leslie in the Starrcade main event. But Hogan is continuing to just reign as champion in 96, into 97. And NWO is really cool. Voodoo Child by Jimi Hendrix being his theme. Puts over Luger at the Palace of Auburn Hills. And they're standing in Detroit. That was a big deal. That's a goddamn goosebump-inducing moment. And then he won the title back 5 days later. And then face off against Sting and put him over clean. Except he didn't because he didn't have a tan. He wasn't motivated. And Hogan said, that doesn't work for me, brother. Because Eric fucking Bischoff was an idiot for giving him creative fucking control. And we saw exactly what happened. Oh, he never used creative control before that. Bull fucking shit you didn't, Hulk. So nevertheless, we basically are just getting, we're getting Hogan, now getting a little bit overbearing. Because Yeah, Sting won the championship. Then they did a disputed finish soon after on Nitro. Held the title up for 2 goddamn months. Because that didn't work for him, brother. Then, yeah, he put over Sting, but Hogan was still seen as the top guy. Sting lost the championship to Randy Savage. Randy Savage lost the championship right back to Hogan. And yes, Randy Savage's knees were fucking shot by that point because he tried to do something cool to get some kind of interest in that steel cage match with Piper and Hogan at Halloween Havoc 97. And it's amazing that Savage's legs didn't just fly into the air. But yeah, Savage was gone soon after. Hogan was champion. And then because he wasn't going to be on the Georgia Dome show, he decided to put over Bill Goldberg for the World Championship because they were going to have a bunch of people in the goddamn Georgia Dome, and Hogan was getting to get a new contract. Because I think his contract is coming up soon. I think a new 3-year contract. And he got a new one. And he put over Bill Goldberg with with a few run-ins and whatever, but hey, it was a hell of a goddamn moment. And then Hogan got an arm bar or got locked on an armbar by Jay fucking Leno. And yes, the stuff at Bash at the Beach, teaming up with Dennis Rodman against Karl Malone, DDP, was a big deal. Karl Malone, the dirty pervert that he is, by the way, he's still alive, unfortunately. Hogan did that, then he did the feud with the Ultimate Warrior in WCW, which was terrible. 1000% terrible. That was on both of them. Both were lazy. Both were terrible. And then Hogan would come back later in 98, early 99, be part of the Finger Poke of Doom, would then become world champion again, do all the stuff that he was doing. It was terrible. 1000% terrible. Him facing Flair and kind of turning back to the red and yellow Terry, which he did. He got injured in Spring Stampede 98 because he was having knee issues because he kept doing the atomic leg drop, so he kept destroying his knees, destroying his back and stuff like that. Which, well, Hogan, if you weren't a racist piece of shit and a goddamn bigot and a goddamn evil person, I'd feel bad for you, except I don't. But he won the world championship again. He would then lose it to Sting when Sting turned heel, which nobody wanted to fucking see. He did show back up in the red and yellow, and then he disappeared from television sometime after, I believe, Halloween Havoc 99. And then wasn't back for a number of months. Like, it was a while. Like, it was, I think it was like late January, early February, which I know doesn't seem like a lot of time, but Hogan had a lot of limited appearances and stuff like that. But then, faced off against Luger, I believe, a Super Brawl 2000. He has a feud with Billy Kidman that didn't go anywhere. The White Hummer thing. He said he was going to eat Bischoff's ass for no reason. After Piper ate his ass at the aforementioned Halloween Havoc 97 cage match. Yes, that actually happened. And then Bash at the Beach 2000. Covered to death. That's why his company's in damn shape is in, because of bullshit like this. One of the few right things that Hogan has said. And to be quite honest, Jeff Jarrett being crowned world champion was fucking ridiculous. Because Jeff Jarrett was never a major world champion, as far as material. I mean, I'm sorry, but him as WCW champion was terrible. But then that led to Vince Russo basically causing a massive lawsuit where Hogan got millions and millions of dollars, and his contract with Time Warner kept going, and that was it. And he would do the XWF. He then would show up at the NWO. Basically, the last great Hogan moment that they had at WrestleMania was against The Rock. It's a leg drop. He made out with a giant with that move. That was a big deal. Then he would go back to not being Voodoo Child, or he would still have Voodoo Child, but he would also use Real America and that kind of stuff because Vince didn't want to pay for the music rights. He'd be tag team champion with Edge. He would lose to Kurt Angle via tap out. He was only the world champion after being Triple H for like a month. Being dragged by Undertaker's motorcycle through a hallway, which was hilarious. Like watching a little racist, sack of wheat running around. Hogan would hate to be referred to as a sack of wheat because wheat is brown. But in 2002, as we got closer to SummerSlam, he put over Brock, chewing a blood capsule, which you could clearly see him chewing the blood capsule. Good job. And that was supposed to lead to Hogan coming back at Survivor Series and facing off against Brock, but he didn't want to do that. So he didn't want to put him over, because he didn't like to put people over. Yes, he put people over in WCW, but did he really? Like, take a look at a lot of that shit. Did he really put them over? No, not really. And then he did come back in 2003 Rematch with The Rock in Montreal. Montreal Screwjob once again. Mania 19 with Vince. Hogan's last great Mania match, actually his last Mania match, period. And that was a big goddamn moment. Vince bleeding, unfortunately not bleeding out at that point, the dirty pervert that he is. But then we got, him as Mr. America. That didn't last long. He would come back in 2005, the Muhammad Hassan thing, which was a big moment. The feud with Shawn Michaels, where Shawn Michaels used his good eye to kick Hogan, flopped around like a fish at SummerSlam 05. And that was actually Hogan's last match in WWE. Well, actually it wasn't, because he faced up against Randy Orton in 2006. But by that point, he was getting beat up and injury prone and stuff like that, because he'd been doing it for a number of years, even with time off. So then he does the TNA run, which the TNA run was terrible. 1,000% terrible. He was, he had his injuries. He did face up against Sting at Bound for Glory 2011, which was terrible. He faced up against Flair, associated with Flair. Him and Bischoff were there. The Hogan theme admittedly went hard, as the kids say, but his TNA run was not all that memorable. The Abyss stuff, all that stuff was pretty terrible. The thing about Hogan, though, is Hogan still wanted to compete, but by that point, he had competed like in January 2012, on a UK tour for TNA, and that was his last recorded match. Because he had his injuries, he had his stuff and whatever. He would show back up on WWF television, I believe in January of 2014. He would say, good to be back here at the Silverdome, says Superdome, at Mania 30. He would show up with the NWO to help Sting at Mania 31 for some reason. NWO get inducted. Hogan was inducted in the Hall of Fame in 2005 and still got to have a few matches after that. And ever since then, he's made his occasional appearances and everything, but 2015 is when he got, shortly after that Mania 31 appearance is when he got exposed as being a goddamn dirty racist that never fucking apologized. And ever since then, it has been nothing more than just lie after lie after lie, bullshit after bullshit after bullshit, and Hogan's legacy is set in the ring and on the mic. But do not fucking tell me that Hulk Hogan should not be, not Terry Bollea should not be knocked for being the terrible person that he was. And he always will be known as. Because he never wanted to fucking change. And he should have fucking changed. So, yeah, you guys can hate me for this fucking tribute. This stuff I talk about. There are so many memorable moments. Leave your favorite Hogan matches moments in the comments. But I'm not gonna fucking, feel bad that he passed away. I woke up about an hour after the news broke that he passed away. And the jokes on Twitter are hilarious. The jokes on social media are hilarious. Because he fucking deserves it. So I hope Brooke has peace. I hope Nick Hogan doesn't have any fucking peace. I hope Linda Hogan's goddamn rotting away. And his wife, who's stupid enough to marry him. What the fuck? All I gotta say is, rest in piss, Terry Hulk Hogan Bollea. Because guess what? Guess what? You wanted to piss on your legacy. You wanted to piss on the fans. It's your fault you ended up like this. It's your fault that you passed away like this. All you had to do is take care of yourself, not be an evil son of a bitch, despite being a great professional wrestler or great professional wrestling draw. Your legacy is complicated, and we are not going to act like you. We are not going to be frustrated. We are going to laugh. And by we, I mean the vast majority. So yeah, rest in piss, Hulk Hogan. Leave your favorite moments in the comments. Like, share, subscribe. I'm going to put my stuff in the description because I don't feel bad for Hulk Hogan. Anyway, I'm John Ritland. Until we meet again, happy trails and burn in hell, Hulk Hogan.